everybody, I'm Dennis Daly. I spent 20 years with United Press International, most of it with the old UPI Radio Network. And my favorite assignment was going on the road producing and hosting American Montage. It was an hour-long weekly program. Now here's an edited version of one of those shows. Scott Hartwig is one of the more knowledgeable people at the Gettysburg National Cemetery, the wonderfully preserved area where one of the most important battles of the Civil War was fought. I sat down with Scott in the lobby area of the cyclorama there, one of the more beautiful exhibits at Gettysburg, and mentioned to him that Gettysburg has a wonderful ring to it in a way, and I doubt if there's any corner of the world where people have not heard the word Gettysburg.
That's very true. There's a large number of foreign visitors who come here who they know it depends on where they're coming from. Oriental visitors tend to focus a great deal on Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address. In fact, one of our rangers, when he gave a program in the National Cemetery, he concluded his program to try to show people how relevant what happened at Gettysburg is to people all over the world. He said he was watching the evening news during the disturbances in Tiananmen Square in China, and he said this Chinese student was standing there, and they said, "What do you want?" And she said, "I want government of the people, by the people, for the people."
Wow.
So, and that's how he ended his program, and you know, for Americans, sometimes we take all of this for granted, what was fought for during the Civil War and what we fought for in other wars, but people from other countries don't. Now, it depends on Germans and French and English and Australians. Many of them know a lot about the battle, and they're very interested in the battle. They know about Lincoln. They want to go over and see where the address was, but they're very interested in the battle itself. They want to get out on the battlefield. Americans, whether they know a lot about the battle or nothing about the battle, almost unanimously, the people that I meet, when they get out on the field, if they spend some time here and they get on the field, this is a very moving place. It's a very haunting place. And part of the reason for that is twofold. One, the field has been very well preserved. You always hear stories about Gettysburg. It's a big commercial trap. The reality of Gettysburg is that the battlefield itself, where the battle took place, is one of the best preserved battlefields in the world. There were a lot of men in their 30s and their 40s who enlisted because on both sides that was seen as, that was the thing to do. It was the duty. I mean, they were needed. It's almost as if the visitor, when they're here and they see these monuments and they walk over the battlefield and they peer out over this ground and they know that something big and dark and terrible took place on these fields. And then you see these monuments. And the monuments were raised by the men who were here. It was their message that they left to the people who would come after them, is to say, we were here, we suffered here, this is what we did here. Don't forget what happened here, because it's important. And it's very moving. I mean, it's rare I talk to somebody who spends some time here. And people who whip through the place real fast and drive out of here, it's like they get a couple pictures and some popcorn, they're gone. But for the people who spend some time, they walk away with a real sense of history and that something special and unique in America happened here.
The movie Gettysburg, that was done by, I guess it was Ted Turner's organization, right, and Martin Sheen played Robert E. Lee, which I thought at first was not good casting, but I turned out to really enjoy his performance. You mentioned the fact that the battlefield itself is so well preserved. It would have been impossible to do that recreation or any of the Civil War recreations here if you saw a billboard for Ramada Inn someplace in the distance, and you don't.
Right. Yeah, and they did a lot of the filming they did, the real battle action stuff they did, they reconstructed a part of the battlefield about a mile actually off of the park. But they did do some shots, and the most memorable one of the film was the advance of Pickett's division and Pickett's charge. That shot was done where Pickett's division actually advanced from on the battlefield. And it looks just like it did in 1863.
I think the other thing that it's tough for people today to realize, at least from my perspective, where we have radar and we can see at night and we have communications and terrible weapons of war, is that we were dealing with people who had to scout with their eyes. They couldn't see what was over the next hill. There weren't surveillance satellites, but they were fighting hand to hand. And in that movie, I had never seen a battle scene filmed in my mind, with such realism that I was wondering how the actors were keeping from getting hurt. I mean, people were out there. At one time, I forget the description, but the shot that was flying, you could almost walk on it. I mean, I would have been terrified, and people were, of course.
Well, they were, but the thing sometimes we forget with these men is we get an image of the Civil War as a bunch of amateurs running around playing soldier, whereas by the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, they weren't amateurs anymore. These were two professional armies. The Confederate Army was a professional army. You had generals like A.P. Hill, Longstreet, McLaws, Hood, Ewell, Lee. I could go on and on. All of the men were professional soldiers. They were West Point graduates, and they had served in the United States Army before the war. They trained everybody beneath them. So it was a professional army, so was the Union Army. And even the volunteers who made up both armies, by this point in the war, they were very experienced soldiers, they were professional soldiers, they knew their trade, and they were very good at it.
The bodies of the men were hastily buried, but the farmers around Gettysburg needed those decaying bodies moved, and so a formal plan for a cemetery was set up. The dedication on this weekend in 1863. Edward Everett spoke for 2 hours. Abraham Lincoln for only about 2 minutes. But for Lincoln's words to have captured the world in the 130-plus years since, well, those words had to be something pretty special.
The brilliance of it was its simplicity. And to be able to do that, like Lincoln did, took an incredibly brilliant mind. Not anybody can take a thought, a concept, and turn it into something concrete that we can place our hands on and that we can look at and we can read and we can understand precisely what he means. Lincoln came, he fulfilled his mission. He gave his speech, it was heard, it was picked up by the papers, and one of the indicators that he had done a great job was a note he received from Edward Everett, who Edward Everett, it isn't well known, hated Lincoln, loathed him, thought he was a miserable president, and worked against him until he heard the Gettysburg Address. He wrote Lincoln after that. He wrote him a note. He said, if I could have come close to the central meaning of why we were there in 2 hours, as you did in 2 minutes, I would have been satisfied.
Scott, you take people through here. What is it like for you personally to stand there and realize that it was just those 2 long generations ago and that spot is still here?
I can't ever go over this field or, for instance, go to the place where Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address and stand there and think about it and not be moved, because this is just some of the most important ground in America, because this ground here tells us something about who we are and what we are and where we're supposed to be going.
Well, my thanks to everyone here at Gettysburg, the National Park Service, to Scott Hartwig, and especially to you for listening to this week's program. There is much here at Gettysburg, bittersweet memories, and if you're in the area, for heaven's sake, stop by. And don't just spend 5 minutes. Spend as much time as you can here. And go to the spot where Abraham Lincoln, 132 years ago, delivered an address that will be remembered forever. And there you have it, another edited episode of one of the American Montage programs prepared for the UPI Radio Network back in the 1980s and 90s. I'm Dennis Daly. Thanks for listening. Thanks for going with me this week. And check YouTube for more American Montage programs.